Resident Evil 6 was first released in October of 2012 for the Xbox 360 and PS3, before coming to Windows in March 2013. It sold exceptionally well at over 11 million units, making it the second highest seller behind Resident Evil 5. Its reception upon release was less than ideal. Critically, it was mixed, but for the fans, it was regarded as an insult. If you asked any Resident Evil fan today which entry out of the mainline games is the worst, 99 out of 100 times you'd get RE6 as your answer, without hesitation. Now, my experience with this title was very different, and fortunately for you guys, I had the foresight to put it on Facebook. Flash forward 9 years and I couldn't feel more different. The further away from its launch, the more that I've soured on it. It was at the point where I was dreading getting to this, as I knew I'd have to experience it all over again. Now, for the benefit of you all, I willed myself through it, and to be honest, it's been a roller coaster of opinions. Now, during this review, I'm going to break down what works, what doesn't, and ultimately come to a conclusion on how I view this game. Is it really in my top 3? Is it a trash fire, or is it somewhere in between? Now, if you're enjoying my content, then put a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. It all helps me find a larger audience and grow the channel. But that's enough of that. As always, I'm going to split this review into plot, gameplay and presentation. Now let's dive in. Where do I begin with this? Well, it's probably best to explain RE6 splits its campaign into 4 separate stories that all interweave throughout. Starting in December of 2012 and spanning the next 6 months, Resident Evil 6 takes us on a globe-spanning adventure which centers around the organization Neo Umbrella and the use of the C virus. As the game begins, you can choose one of 3 protagonists: Leon Kennedy, Chris Redfield, or Jake Mueller. Now, there's also Ada, but she was always gated behind the completion of the other 3 campaigns back on its release. And to be honest, she's the one that ties it all together, so you shouldn't ever start with her. Now, I started with Leon and moved down through the others according to their placement on the character select screen, and I imagine that's how most would have experienced it. Now, the actual storyline and key events here are insane. Across the game, you've got the death of the US president, 2 cities being infected, 1 being nuked, an underwater lab monster which has the potential to infect the entire world, 2 new evil organizations in the family and Neo Umbrella, and a bad guy who turns into a dinosaur. It's outlandish, and normally I'd say something like, it's perfect for Resident Evil, but here, it's too much. There's so many spinning plates throughout its run, it's actually quite difficult to put it all together without sitting down and studying the character timelines. Now, this is going to be a theme I explore more in the gameplay section, but to be honest, the game just goes on way too long, like 15 hours too long. And so by the time I got the full understanding of the plot, and why characters have the motivation to do what they do, I just didn't care. There are some glimmers of greatness here. Leon's campaign stands head and shoulders above the others. His plot is the most straightforward out of the lot. It's all focused on bringing Derek Simmons to justice, and it delivers this by exploring Helena's character. Helena is Leon's co-op partner throughout the story, and seeing their relationship grow, while she tries to come to terms with the guilt that she feels for the part she played in the destruction of Tall Oaks and the death of the US president, is actually great. Unfortunately, with Chris and Jake's scenarios, I got nothing good to say plot-wise. Chris and his partner, Piers, are at odds with each other for most of the runtime, due to Chris's PTSD after seeing his entire squad get wiped out, causing a seething need for revenge, and that drives a rift between the 2 characters. Okay, that's fair enough rationale to act the way he does, but you spend 4.5 hours with these characters hating each other, and then try to resolve it in the last 30 minutes. They don't use the time provided to show gradual changes to their relationship. Here it just swings from one extreme to the other. The ramification of this is when Piers lays down his life to save Chris, it definitely didn't work for me. Jake's campaign Jesus Christ. The guy learns he's the son of Albert Wesker. The same Albert Wesker who tried to wipe out the world's population only a few years ago. He didn't know his dad before any of this and has zero relationship or ties to him. Hell, he even states, "I don't want to turn out like my father." So when he learns Chris killed him to save the world, what does he do? He pulls a gun out on him.
Right.
Sherry is Jake's co-op partner, and she unfortunately adds nothing to be in there. It could literally be anyone. She's purely there for a bit of fan service. My biggest issue with the plot overall is as soon as the game tries to go big with any of its themes, post-traumatic stress disorder, father-son relationships, abandonment, it fails miserably, and it's all due to it having to weave too many elements together to try and make it feel coherent. It can't spend the time to explore any of these themes to any real depth, to strike that emotional chord that it would need to resonate with us, the audience. So instead, it all just comes across as bland and frankly, uninteresting. Like the saying goes, keep it simple, stupid. After the critical and commercial success of Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5, it's no surprise Resident Evil 6 follows in the same suit. The over-the-shoulder perspective returns, as does co-op, but its implementation and gameplay feels very different from its predecessors. Just like my experience with 5, I played 6 with my friend and fellow podcast host Spencer. If you want to hear his opinion on the game, as he experienced it for the first time, you can find a link to the podcast in the description and in the card above. Resident Evil 6 takes the action routes that were laid out with 4 and 5 and says,
And this
What's he doing?
is to go even further beyond!
the tank controls are gone. Here, you can move and shoot, making it a first for the series. Now, as I stated in my RE5 review, the tank controls were pushed to their limit the more it leaned into action, and you'd often find yourself going blow for blow with enemies when they swarmed you. Here, in 6, they laser focused it onto the action, and due to this, you get the best movement the series has to date. RE6 brings in a dodge button. By pressing L1 and X, you enter a dodge state. From here, depending on the direction you press, you'll perform different actions. Backwards, and you'll do a Max Payne style leap landing on your back. To the front, you'll do a forward roll. Left and right performs a dive in that direction. Now you'd think, okay, there's bound to be some disadvantage to doing this, right? When I land, can I not do anything? Do I need to time it so I don't get swatted lying there? Nope. Here, you hit the ground, pull the gun up, and start spraying. If an enemy somehow manages to survive this onslaught and goes for an attack, you can roll from this position to avoid hits. Capcom must have been slurping up Jet Li movies during the development of 6, and I have to say, it's excellent. The fun I had opening every door and rolling through it shouting, "Clear!" or putting down a remote bomb and jumping backwards as I detonated it. It's absolutely ridiculous, but so enjoyable. Playing RE6 is the furthest thing possible from Resident Evil. There's no item or resource management. Even though there's full co-op, there's never a need to organise items between you both. Basically 0 puzzles, no horror and no tension. It's an action game, and it knows it. It's not the half step 5 was. Here, you just strap in and enjoy the ride. Me and Spencer had such a fun experience during Leon's campaign, laughing and joking throughout it. We were on board for just how ridiculous the entire thing is. Yeah.
Hey y'all!
Kill! Have you got anything left? I've only got shotgun and pistol.
Yeah, I'm gonna use my pistol, mate.
Time to go akimbo.
Can't tell for hitting him.
I can't tell shit. Oh!
Yeah!
Now, if we directly compare Resident Evil 5 to 6, there's a number of improvements here that elevate the experience with this action lens. Firstly, the UI. It isn't the prettiest thing. In fact, it's ugly as hell, but it's easy to navigate. You can select from heals on your explosives with the up and down arrows on the D-pad, and weapons with the left and right. It's super quick, and it keeps you from needing to enter the menu at all. The aim of RE6 is momentum, and everything is built around you moving from area to area as quickly as possible. And this is evident not only with the simple UI and movement options, but also with level design. Here in 6 they add in a waypoint. With the press of L2 you can see where you're supposed to go with a massive on-screen arrow. It replaces a map system typical for Resident Evil, removing any sense of planning or preparation, keeping you in the action and moving you onwards to the next explosive set piece as fast as possible. All 3 of these elements work in tandem to underpin the vision the game had. Action above all else. And I respect it. Sure, it's not what I want from the series, but they set out with this goal and at least they achieved it here, unlike Resident Evil 5, which straddled the line and ended up not performing particularly well on either the survival horror or action front. Staying on this RE5 to RE6 comparison just for the moment, RE5 committed a real sin in recycling enemies from Resident Evil 4, but here, in Resident Evil 6, the enemy design is superb. Zombies return, but they aren't really anything special, and to be honest, all the new versions are ripped straight from Left 4 Dead. It's the Javo here that really shine. Depending on where you damage them, they'll mutate into Special Infected. Shoot their arms and a massive sickle-like appendage will burst out to smack those cheeks. Shoot the chest and they'll gain armor all over them. It's small things like this that I really respected. In other entries, it was only the boss enemies that would ever mutate as a result of damage, but here, it can be any of the Javo, and I loved it. It made the C-Virus feel much more alive, especially when compared to the bursting parasite heads of Resident Evil 4 and 5. Now I've been nothing but positive on this section so far, but it's time to get into the issues, and they're pretty major. First, let's cover the melee attacks. With the press of R2, your character will perform context-sensitive melee attacks, just like Resident Evil 5, and this works great. However, they decided to ditch the co-op melee combo system, which was one of the highlights of its predecessor. Now, you both just flail on an enemy. It does the job, but the satisfaction of bouncing an enemy back and forth between you, ending it in a haymaker, is gone. And its removal is one decision I honestly can't understand. The skill system. By killing enemies or exploring the environment, you'll find skill points. These replace the gold and treasures that you find in Resident Evil 4 and 5. Use them to purchase skills to upgrade your character, be that increased weapons or melee damage, increasing the odds of the enemies dropping ammo or skill points. But the issue I have is you can only ever allocate 3 skills to your character, and the limited number of points that you accumulate over the course of the game make it feel pointless. I never changed skills from the moment I put my 3 in there, and even when I leveled them up, I couldn't see any difference that they made to my damage. A visual indicator to show how much of a buff you'd get would go a small way to resolving this, but as it stands, collecting the skill points isn't rewarding, fun, or involving. It's just something you do, and then you go massive stretches of time before even using them, to then not even feel the difference after they've been activated. It's such a step back from individually leveling weapons in Resident Evil 4 and 5, and feels completely unengaging. The bosses. Outside of a couple of decent encounters, like the invisible snake and the final fight with Usanak, it feels kinda lame. They work well enough, but there's nothing that really stands out. It's just pull your gun out and lay into a big enemy. That's it. There isn't any interesting mechanics or anything particularly memorable. It just does the job, and that's a real shame. Now I mentioned across the review I had a blast with Leon's campaign, and honestly, after finishing it, I thought my mind had been changed on the game. Hell, I was thinking it was a better experience than Resident Evil 4, but that's certainly not the case. So let's explore what happened. During Leon's campaign, the variety is incredible. 1 minute you're in an infected city, then you're in spooky catacombs fighting skeleton zombies. Then you're ejecting creatures from the cargo bay.
No ticket.
And then you're stopping a jet from crashing into a city, all before you build up to the final confrontation and another citywide catastrophe. It's an amazing experience, and if the game ended there at 6 hours, I would have been happy. But it doesn't, and so you have the same level of insane over-the-top action for another 15 hours. It's too much. The length and the sheer amount of lunacy on screen make you numb to what you're actually doing, instead of thinking, Jesus Christ, this is nuts, and laughing at what you're doing. You eye roll as it just becomes normal. It doesn't help that with the plot crossing so much between the 4 stories, you end up replaying sections that you've done before, but with different characters, with nothing really changing. Sure, maybe you're providing sniper cover now rather than being on a boat, or fixing a bus rather than engaging in a fight, but you know what's going to happen. It just feels bloated, and frankly, boring. By the time Chris's campaign wrapped, I was dreading doing the others. It was a slog. Now, I'm not saying that Leon's campaign was leagues better than the others. I believe that whichever campaign you do first, you'll have the most fun with. The problem with familiarity is it breeds contempt, and that's the biggest problem with the game. No matter how varied the actual game is, when you redo the same actions 3 more times with different skins, it's mind-numbing. It also doesn't help that any section not involving running or shooting is horrendously bad. The controls for driving or shooting from one of these encounters are actually insulting. I wouldn't be surprised if this was actually a punishment they'd use in some Vietnamese POW camp. Hell, they'd have me talking in a heartbeat. It's like as if someone coded this in an hour and thought, it's good enough. And just look at that UI. Is that a fucking JPEG of a Jeep?
Do it! Do it!
Come on, kill me, I'm here!
And that's my issue with the gameplay. You get 1/4 of the way through the entire game, and instead of feeling like, I can't wait to dive back in, it's shown you everything it's got, so the other 3/4 just feel pointless, and ultimately degrade the overall experience, turning a fun action game into a mind-numbing slog, where I couldn't wait to get it over with. Resident Evil 6 is a game that feels like it's directed by equal parts Michael Bay and Zack Snyder. The amount of over-the-top explosions and frequent slow motion convey that Hollywood blockbuster feeling the game is going for, and to be honest, it's the funniest experience I've had in a long time. The reason for this is how straight-faced it's all portrayed. Now, I've already explained how this feeling doesn't last, but for that first campaign, I was so on board for this tone. I was laughing hysterically throughout the scenes of absolute carnage that were on screen. Now, the performances that complement all this action are top-notch. I don't have a single bad thing to say about any of the cast. There isn't a bad egg, like there is with most games in the series. Everyone does their job brilliantly, and it's no wonder. Looking at the cast, it's chocked full of the usual names that we'd expect to see leading games in modern times, from Troy Baker right through to Laura Bailey. The level of graphical quality that accompany these voices is also superb. All the cutscenes are directed to amplify the action, and they are all a joy to watch. For the first time anyway. Now, when it comes to gameplay, the variety of locations you visit is admirable. Every area feels unique, and is visually striking from the others. The character models all look fantastic, especially Deborah. The level of production that went into this entry is simply astonishing. Over 600 employees worked on this game, and in the graphics department, it's really evident how much money was spent on this title. The game looks better than most games on the PS3, and today, it still holds up exceptionally well. Now let's talk about the QTEs. I love them. That's right, you heard. The way they're implemented this time works really well. They stay away from cutscenes, for the most part. Instead, here they're used as a way to avoid damage from an enemy grab, or to extend a melee attack. A button prompt appears and you have to time the press inside the specified area displayed. it's actually really satisfying, and it's leagues ahead of Resident Evil 4 and 5's inclusion. Now let's end here with the music. What music? Seriously, there are some decent tracks like the main menu music and the end of chapter themes, but that's about it. Listening back to the OST, there's actually some brilliant music here, but during gameplay, none of it stood out, and to me, that's the benchmark. At the start of this review, I showed a graph visualizing my opinion on the game over time. Well, here's now. If the game had been 15 hours shorter, this review would be a different beast. But it's not. For as fun as the gameplay is, 20 hours is far too long to do the same things over and over again, especially when you do them from a slightly different perspective. Combine this with the uninteresting and unnecessary skill system, vehicle sections which feel like a personal attack, and a plot which overall fails to captivate me, and you create an experience that I never want to return to. Ever. I couldn't wait for it to end, and I've not felt like that once in any of the previous titles I've covered. Now that may sound harsh, but it's how I truly feel. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Now I'd love to hear your opinion on Resident Evil 6, so comment below and tell me your thoughts on the game. I try to respond to everyone I can on my channel, so I look forward to hearing from you. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to put a like on it, and subscribe for more Resident Evil content. Next up is Resident Evil 7, before I release a spoiler review of Resident Evil 8, which I'll release a few weeks after its launch, to give you all the time you need to enjoy the game. Thank you for your time. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. See ya.